Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Our guest today has over 20 years coaching, consulting, and teaching experience with multi-million-dollar publicly and privately owned businesses, showing them how to make workplaces more productive and rewarding places to be. And today she's going to show you how to raise emotionally intelligent leaders. Please put your hands together and help me welcome to the Mental Detox podcast, our good friend, Vicky Henderson.
Welcome, Vicky.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
Pleasure. Now, that's a different accent to mine. It must be British.
Yes, hanging out in little old England over here.
Very lucky. Very different to me. Where are you from? Honestly.
1/16 Duchess.
1/16. She claims to be 1/16 Duchess. So we'll roll with that one today.
Yeah, well, what year is it? This year is 2020.
The year of the mouse.
Yeah, long time ago. I remember, Vicky, we met first time in 2016 or 2017.
2016, yeah.
Yeah, it was a long time. So I know that you were facing some of the health challenge by that time. And what was happening at that time? And what contributed to them? And how did you manage to overcome them so quickly? Because I know you have come a long way till today.
Absolutely. So in 2016, I was possibly the most unemotionally intelligent person you could have met. I now famously describe myself as a mood hoover at work. I was quite capable of pulling the positive mood out of anything and replacing it with something very negative and toxic. And I was living in constant fatigue and chronic pain. So I had fibromyalgia that had been rumbling along in the background for 6 years by that time, nearly 7, and an autoimmune illness, both of which caused almost identical symptoms. So to give you an idea, I used to put my feet on the floor beside my bed in the morning when I woke up, and it would be so painful, it would bring tears to my eyes. And yet every day I would get up and go to work. And in my previous jobs, I'd been on my feet all day. This one, at least I could sit down for it, but it didn't make me a very nice person to know at work. So I decided something had to be done. First of all, I engaged a counsellor to stop me killing my boss. He is still alive, you'll be glad to hear. And then I slowly sort of discovered personal development and really got into reading books and things. And then there was an opportunity to do a 3-day live event with you, Daniel and Nini. And I arrived at that event with 28,000 kilos of excess emotional baggage. I spent 3 days crying, laughing, making lifelong friends, crying a little bit more. It was the most exhausting 3 days of my life, but I walked out 3 days later, a completely different woman with a small clutch bag under my arm, having got rid of a whole load of stuff. And that was really the beginning of my journey to becoming pain-free. The idea that I could be pain-free had started to seed at that point, but it hadn't quite grown to fruition. So I then trained to be an NLP and timeline therapy coach practitioner with yourselves. And I went on a journey through the fantastic cadet program all the way through to master practitioner. And we got to a certain point in Taiwan in 2018, almost to the day, during the master practitioner training, where we were going to do something called the pain paradigm. And everyone was like, fantastic, we're going to do this on Vicky, and it's all going to be amazing. And you turned around to me and you said, so shall we do this? And I said, Daniel, I'm no longer in any pain. And I spent the next 6 months weaning myself off my pain medication, and I haven't touched it since. So we're now 18 months down the line.
I know. I mean, when you share, when Vicky sharing this story, I have my goosebump, just popping on. And I mean, for me, I feel emotional as well. I see how you, when we met in 2016 until now, I know you've been phenomenal. The whole transformations. Yeah.
And it's interesting to hear that, because I didn't realize that just putting your feet on the floor was a painful experience. I mean, to have that level of pain,
everything.
to be able to live with that alone, that's incredible. I mean, what a place to be from pain to pain free in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah. And I never believed it was possible. Everyone says, oh, once you have it, that's it. And then I started to believe that thing. The fatigue went first. I'm like, this is interesting. But yeah, it was definitely the change of mindset set some amazing things going in my mind.
Incredible. Before we move on, and there's a lot we want to talk about raising emotionally intelligent leaders. Can you just go back to what you mentioned about emotional intelligence and where your levels of emotional intelligence were before you started on your journey? Because I know that you've improved your emotional intelligence multiple times over and huge improvements, but a lot of people probably don't realize that there is a connection between pain and your level of emotional intelligence. To give people an idea, emotional intelligence is nothing new. It's something that we can now measure. And for more than 100 years, they've done research on people's levels of emotional intelligence and their ability to heal their body. And what they've said is that people who have a low level of self-awareness and a low level of self-regulation find it harder to heal and harder to manage the emotions that come along with the pain. And they also discovered that the people who had higher levels of emotional intelligence, who were able to regulate their emotions more effectively, were pain-free and actually recovered from operations faster. So as knowing what you now know, what was happening back then with the levels of emotional intelligence, and if you can contrast it once again to where it is today?
So before I met you at all, I now know that I had very low levels of emotional intelligence, probably across the board, with the exception of social awareness. I've always been very empathetic. But I think what happened was when I'd had an up and down life with depression anyway. But when I really started to dig around to it, when I had the car accident that triggered the fibromyalgia, I was very angry for the loss of my previous life. I was very guilty that I had to ask people to help me that I hadn't had to do. I was sad at the loss of the life that I had hoped I was going to have. And I had attached all of these very strong emotions to what was physically happening to me. And over the years, as it became more difficult to do things, I became more angry and I felt more guilt and I felt sadder, and the whole thing just spiraled altogether. And what that led to happening was I was in a position of leadership, and it led to a nervous breakdown in one job where I buried my emotions. I had no self-awareness of the impact it was having on me. I went for 5 months, I was working crazy hours, and I was just like, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this. I then completely fell off the planet and had literally spent 2 months housebound. So that when then I went back to work, things did change because I'd become more vocal about the problems. I wasn't keeping them in as much, but I had no self-regulation. So I would voice all of this negativity all of the time. And as soon as everybody else, it then became a vicious circle, because there were issues and problems in the workplace that I was in for all sorts of reasons. And everybody else was a bit negative and I was negative, and it just made a vicious circle out of it. And I was not the leader that I should have been. I could lead people, but I was leading them in a very negative and toxic way. I had a lot of people follow me, but as I now know, having a leader that people follow who is toxic is really dangerous to the organization, because actually I was damaging it. I wasn't supporting the reputation of that company. I was doing what I felt I needed to do, but that was it, basically.
Amazing. And because we're talking about raising emotionally intelligent leaders, you know what it's like to be toxic personally. Now, one of the things that you're talking about today there in the UK is you're talking about the self-concept. So in leadership, what is the self-concept? What's a poor self-concept? and how does it impact a leader's performance?
So my two favourite people on this subject are Brian Tracy and Daniel Goleman. Now, Brian Tracy, in his book, which is called Goals, How to Get Everything You Want Faster Than You Ever Thought Possible, he talks about the self-concept, and he says it's your master program for success. To quote him directly, he says, your self-concept precedes and predicts your level of performance and effectiveness in everything you do. So it's really, really key. And then Daniel Goleman goes on and talks about his 5 discoveries in his book, Primal Leadership, which is fantastic. And his first discovery is about the ideal self, where change begins. And the second is the real self. Are you a boiling frog? Now, I was a boiling frog, most definitely. And if you've not heard the boiling frog metaphor before, it's that if you drop a frog into a pan of boiling water, it will immediately sense the temperature difference and jump straight back out again to save it. However, if you start in a pan of cold water with a frog, and over time the temperature goes up and up and up and up, the frog doesn't notice it, and eventually it will sit in the pan and boil itself to death. And I was that boiling frog. I was sitting in the pan boiling myself to death, and something changed that made me need to jump out of it. And I believe it was the discovery of self-concept. Now, there are 3 parts to your self-concept. There's your, there's your self-image, which is where you are now. What do you believe you deserve in life? What do you believe you're entitled to in life? And that answer will be dictated by your beliefs, your self-limiting beliefs, as in things that you say, well, actually, I'm not entitled to that. So you're holding yourself back. And that's very much where you are now. On the other side of that is your self-esteem, which is the core of your personality. Now, this was the bit that was key for me. How much do you like and respect yourself? Well, I can tell you, I didn't used to like myself, because I'd stand in front of the mirror and go, you fat, ugly failure. And those were some of the things I could publicly share that I used to say to myself. And I didn't respect myself because I wasn't treating myself properly. I was eating rubbish. I wasn't exercising. I wasn't being nice to myself. I was treating myself in a way that if anybody else treated me like that, I would be apoplectic with rage, fury. I was being really horrible to myself. So that's the second part. And then there's the third part at the top, which is the self-ideal, which is, what do you want to look like? And this was the big thing for me. And it wasn't about business or work or family or friends. It was about, what do you want to look like? What does Vicky Henderson or anybody else watching want to look like in 6 months' time, in a year's time, in 5 years' time? How is that person going to think? How are you going to behave? What's going to be your values? How are you going to show up in the world so that you can be that person that you want to be? And it's so key that I work through this with every single client now that I work with, because unless they've got a really good idea of their self-concept, where they are now and where they want to be, it's going to be very difficult for them to move forward and become the leader that they want to be in work. So I work on this with everybody, depending on it, how you're going through it. But once you know all of this information, you can then start to put, as Daniel Goleman says in his 5 principles, a learning agenda in place, which is discovery number 4. Discovery number 5 is putting, reconfiguring the brain, and then you get the power of relationships at the end of it. And that's what leadership's all about. It's about your relationships.
Powerful.
I like the idea of the self-concept, and I love self-image modification. And we were talking offline before about different styles of assessments. You know, emotional intelligence today, we can measure, but we can also measure it singularly, and we can also measure it multiple multidimensionally. So we can have other people make comment on our level of emotional intelligence and we can measure it. And having information like that really helps the self-concept, because in the research of Goldman as well, he says that only about 36% of the population can identify the emotions that they're experiencing at any given time. And we know that individuals have so many blind spots. So in terms of self-image modification, if people have unknown unknowns, it's not what you know that hurts you, it's what you don't know. And bringing those things back into your awareness gives you a competitive advantage, but it also gives that ability to raise an emotionally intelligent leader. And everybody knows and they remember the person who was not emotionally intelligent, who tried to lead them into battle. And we used to see this when we worked in Emirates Airline.
Yeah.
You'd get a leader coming in to the round table and you'd do your briefing and they'd tell you all about themselves and how relaxed and chilled out they were and how they're going to support you 100%. And you got on the aircraft and they did the absolute opposite. and it was stressful. So emotionally intelligent leaders are critical in today's world.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, 100%. And we also say that for ourselves, we are our own leaders. If we couldn't, control ourselves, how can we influence others? So, Well,
in personal leadership, we say leadership is the ability to get results in your own life.
Yeah.
And if you don't have strong emotional intelligence, you're not going to get the right results.
Yeah.
And then in business, it's the ability to get followers. And an emotionally intelligent leader can get followers because that empathy that you mentioned before, they can read the emotional makeup of other people. And that's exciting. So, Vicky, in your opinion, what are a couple of ideas that our friends and followers can implement today so they can raise emotionally intelligent leaders in their business? What can they start doing immediately?
Well, I'm going to put two caveats in before that. The first one is our good friend, Simon Sinek, who I know that you and we are both big fans of. He said that in a modern day world, we shouldn't be aiming for best. We should be aiming for better. And that's what I get my clients to focus on. I don't want you to be the best leader. There's no way of measuring who the best leader is. I just want you to be a better leader tomorrow than you were today, and a better leader today than you were yesterday. So that's the first thing. Simon also says that a leader isn't about rank. Now, every organization has a leader in it. There will be a leader in the team working on a factory packing line, all the way up to the leaders at the top of the business. So you need to be aware of who those leaders are in your business and allow them to develop emotionally intelligent behaviors. So the first thing I get all of my clients to do is firstly go through an emotional intelligence assessment. Having had a conversation with them before to find out a little bit about where they think they are verbally, and how they can express it. Then they go through an emotional intelligence assessment, which allows us to find out some of those things that maybe they don't know about themselves. And then we can use that as a springboard. And I actually have an activity that I do with them, and I send them off and I get them to develop on a piece of paper what their self-concept looks like at the moment. I actually get them to go away and write down what they believe they deserve in life, what they believe they're entitled to. I get them to go and brainstorm what their limitations are, their self-limiting beliefs, so things that are holding them back. I then get them to look at what the strengths and the weaknesses are in their personality. And then the big one in there is I get them to rank themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 for how much they like themselves and how much they respect themselves. And then there's a whole load of investigation we can do around, okay, so you've chosen a 4 for how much you like yourself. Why haven't you chosen a 3, which gets them thinking in a slightly different way to normally? Why haven't you chosen a 4? Then I get them to go and write down what their ideal self is going to look like, what they're going to look like, what they're going to sound like, what that person's going to feel like, what that person's going to say to themselves, how they're going to show up. And I get them to write down again on a scale of 1 to 10, to be that person, how much do you have to like and respect yourself? And again, we investigate those scores, and it gives them a really deep understanding of where they are now and where they need to start moving to on an individual level to lead their own lives, so that that can then be moved forward in the coaching, so they can roll it down to how they're going to show up in their business, how they're going to lead their business, how they're going to identify other leads who can then trickle it all the way down to the entry level guys who have as much right to feel safe and led by an emotionally intelligent leader as the whole organization does.
A lot of business people will like these ideas because they're practical. And the second question they're going to ask is, if we have emotionally intelligent leaders, are we going to make more money? Based on the work that you're doing, what are some of these improvements? And I know you've done a lot of research into this. What are some of the improvements there in profitability by having emotionally intelligent leaders? Could you share some insights into that?
Absolutely. So I put all of my clients through an emotional intelligence assessment at the beginning and at the end of their coaching with me. I'll give you just a couple of ideas here. So there was a lady who came to me who struggled to manage disappointment, which used to flare up as anger. And she said it was very easy to push her buttons. We have become friends, and she now says, I don't have any buttons to push. So the buttons have been removed. She increased her self-regulation by 44% whilst we worked together. Which basically meant that she now has much better control over those negative impulses. But what she also slipped into conversation one day was, in the 6 months that we worked together, she doubled annual turnover from the previous year. And her business has just continued to go from strength to strength. We finished coaching about 18 months ago now, and she's looking at taking on her first employee, and yeah, things are thriving for her. And she now feels she can be that emotionally intelligent leader.
44% improvement and doubled the annual revenues.
Yeah.
Incredible.
In 6 months.
Incredible. So for people who want to learn more about the work that you're doing in emotional intelligence, what's the best place? Where do you hang out online? Where can they find you?
So I hang out on both LinkedIn and on Facebook predominantly. And you can reach out and contact me through my website as well. I've got a little success profile on there for the success mindset. You can have a bash at trying to see where you are. And if you want to reach out and have a chat with me, my initial consultation is completely free of charge. So if you want to book in and have a chat about what I do and how I might be able to help you and your business, you know, I'd be absolutely delighted to talk to you. And
your website is Ascend Performance Coaching. Is that correct?
Yeah, ascendperformancecoaching.com. That's correct.
Excellent. So we will put that link below. I personally recommend that you reach out to Vicky. I have been a client of Vicky's personally, and I know she's a wonderful coach. Nini has also worked with Vicky personally and had some great results, and we recommend that you reach out to her also. So Vicky, thank you for sharing your insights into raising emotionally intelligent leaders. Also, thank you for sharing your personal story, and congratulations on coming so far. Well done.
Thank you very much.
We'll talk to you soon. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.